Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we're going to be looking at Battle Pilgrims and Relic. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. Where to begin? Pilgrims, in the sense I will be talking about today, are essentially those who have forgone their normal, everyday lives in service to their religion. Driven by a mixture of religious fervour from their clergy, the promise of a better afterlife, or just adventurous at heart, they are seeking that which does not come readily to those who enjoy the comforts of home. There are a couple of branches this video is going to take. Firstly, the historical lilt that will be delving into pilgrimage throughout medieval times. Secondly, the fantastical, which is where I will be talking about the miniatures I have used and what they will be used for in battle. History. So, you want to go on a pilgrimage, do you? Let's go through the 5 W's and throw in an H too whilst we're at it to figure out just what the hell you are up to. Where do you want to go? The Holy Land. Why do you want to go there? Seeking answers. Who are you going with? A group of like-minded individuals. What will you take with you? A good sword, a Bible, probably some spare underwear. When will you leave? As soon as possible. Religious fervour waits for no man. How will you get there? In a crusade, of course. The Crusades were a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes directed by the Christian Latin Church in the medieval period. The best known of these military expeditions are those to the Holy Land in the period between 1095 and 1291. It had the objective of reconquering Jerusalem and its surrounding area from Muslim rule after the region had been conquered by the Rashidun Caliphate centuries earlier. Beginning with the First Crusade, which resulted in the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, dozens of military campaigns were organised, providing a focal point of European history for centuries. Crusading declined rapidly after the 15th century. In 1095, after a Byzantine request for aid, Pope Urban II proclaimed the first expedition at the Council of Clermont. He encouraged military support for Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Komnenos and called for an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Across all social strata in Western Europe, there was an enthusiastic response. Participants came from all over Europe and had a variety of motivations. These included religious salvation, satisfying feudal obligations, opportunities for renown, and economic or political advantage. Later expeditions were conducted by generally more organised armies, sometimes led by a king. All were granted papal indulgences, and initial successes established 4 Crusader states: the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and the County of Tripoli. A European presence remained in the region in some form until the fall of Acre in 1291. After this, no further large military campaigns were organised. Other church-sanctioned campaigns included crusades against Christians not obeying papal rulings and heretics, those against the Ottoman Empire, and ones for political reasons. The struggle against the Moors in the Iberian Peninsula, the Reconquista, ended in 1492 with the fall of Granada. From 1147, the Northern Crusades were fought against pagan tribes in Northern Europe. Crusades against Christians began with the Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century and continued through the Hussite Wars in the early 15th century. Crusades against the Ottomans began in the late 14th century and included the Crusade of Varna. Popular crusades, including the Children's Crusade of 1212, were generated by the masses and were unsanctioned by the Church. The term crusade first referred to military expeditions undertaken by European Christians in the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries to the Holy Land. The conflicts to which the term is applied has been extended to include other campaigns initiated, supported and sometimes directed by the Latin Church with varying objectives, mostly religious, sometimes political. These differed from previous Christian religious wars in that they were considered a penitential exercise, so earned participants remittance from penalties for all confessed sins. What constituted a crusade has been understood in diverse ways, particularly regarding the early crusades, and the precise definition remains a matter of debate among contemporary historians. At the time of the First Crusade, iter or journey and peregrinatio or pilgrimage was used for the campaign. Crusader terminology remained largely indistinguishable from that of Christian pilgrimage during the 12th century. A specific term for a crusader in the form of crusignatus, one signed by the cross, emerged in the early 12th century. This led to the French term croisade, or the way of the cross. By the mid-13th century, the cross became the major descriptor of the crusade, with cruce transmarina, the cross overseas, used for crusades in the eastern Mediterranean, and cruce cismarina, the cross this side of the sea, for those in Europe. The use of crozier or crusade in Middle English can be dated to circa 1300, but the modern English crusade dates to the early 1700s. The Crusader states of Syria and Palestine were known as the Outremer, from the French Outremer, or the land beyond the sea. By the end of the 11th century, the period of Islamic Arab territorial expansion had been over for centuries. The Holy Land's remoteness from focus of Islamic power struggles enabled relative peace and prosperity in Syria and Palestine. Muslim Western European contact was only more than minimal in the conflict in the Iberian Peninsula. The Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world were long-standing centres of wealth, culture and military power. They viewed Western Europe as a backwater that presented little organised threat. By 1025, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II had extended territorial recovery to its furthest extent. The frontiers stretched east to Iran, Bulgaria and much of southern Italy were under control, and piracy was suppressed in the Mediterranean Sea. The empire's relationships with its Islamic neighbours were no more quarrelsome than its relationships with the Slavs or the Western Christians. The Normans in Italy to the north, Pajangs, Serbs and Cumans, the Seljuk Turks in the east all competed with the empire, and the emperors recruited mercenaries, even on occasions from their enemies, to meet these challenges. The evolution of a Christian theology of war developed from the link of Roman citizenship to Christianity, with citizens required to fight the empire's enemies. A doctrine of holy war dated from the 4th century theologian St. Augustine. He maintained that aggressive war was sinful, but acknowledged a just war could be rationalized if it was proclaimed by a legitimate authority, was defensive or for the recovery of lands, and without an excessive degree of violence. Violent acts were commonly used for dispute resolution in Western Europe, and the papacy attempted to mitigate this. Historians have thought that the peace and truce of God movements restricted conflict between Christians from the 10th century. The influence is apparent in Pope Urban II's speeches. Other historians assert that the effectiveness was limited and had died out by the time of the Crusades. Pope Alexander II developed a system of recruitment via oaths for military resourcing that his successor, Pope Gregory VII, extended across Europe. In the 11th century, Christian conflict with Muslims on the southern peripheries of Christendom was sponsored by the Church, including the siege of Barbastro and the Norman conquest of Sicily. In 1074, Gregory VII planned a display of military power to reinforce the principle of papal sovereignty. His vision of a holy war supporting Byzantium against the Seljuks was the First Crusade prototype, but lacked popular support. The First Crusade was an unexpected event for contemporary chroniclers, but historical analysis demonstrates it had roots in earlier developments, with both clerics and laity recognizing Jerusalem's role in Christianity as worthy of penitential pilgrimage. The First Crusade. In 1095, Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Komnenos requested military aid from Pope Urban II at the Council of Picenza. He was probably expecting a small number of mercenaries he could direct. Alexios had restored the empire's finances and authority, but still faced numerous foreign enemies. Later that year, at the Council of Clermont, Urban raised the issue again and preached a crusade. Almost immediately, the French priest Peter the Hermit gathered thousands of mostly poor in the People's Crusade. Travelling through Germany, German bands massacred Jewish communities in the Rhineland massacres during wide-ranging anti-Jewish activities. Jews were perceived to be as much an enemy as Muslims, and they were held responsible for the crucifixion, and were more immediately visible. People wondered why they should travel thousands of miles to fight non-believers when there were many closer to home. Quickly after leaving Byzantine-controlled territory on their journey to Nicaea, these crusaders were annihilated in a Turkish ambush at the Battle of Civita. Conflict with Urban II meant that King Philip I of France and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV declined participation. Aristocrats from France, Western Germany, the Low Countries, Languedoc and Italy led independent contingents in loose, fluid arrangements based on bonds of lordship, family, ethnicity and language. The elder statesman Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, was foremost, rivaled by the relatively poor but martial Italo-Norman Bohemond of Taranto and his nephew Tancred. Godfred of Boulogne and his brother Baldwin and forces from Lorraine, Lotharingia and Germany also joined. These 5 princes were pivotal to the campaign, which was augmented by a northern French army led by Robert Couteaux, Count Stephen II of Blois and Count Robert II of Flanders. The total number may have reached as many as 100,000 people, including non-combatants. They travelled eastward by land to Constantinople, where they were cautiously welcomed by the emperor. Alexios persuaded many of the princes to pledge allegiance to him and that their first objective should be Nicaea, the capital of the Sultanate of Rum. Sultan Kilij Arslan left the city to resolve a territorial dispute, enabling its capture after the siege of Nicaea and a Byzantine naval assault in the high point of Latin and Greek cooperation. Raymond IV besieged Acre in February 1099 and sent an envoy to Al-Afdal Shahanshah, the vizier of Fatimid Egypt, seeking a treaty. Adhemar died, leaving the crusade without a spiritual leader. Raymond failed to capture Acre and in May led the remaining army south along the coast. Bohemond retained Antioch and remained, despite his pledge to return it to the Byzantines. Local rulers offered little resistance, opting for peace in return for provisions. The Frankish envoys returned accompanied by Fatimid representatives, and this brought the information that the Fatimids had recaptured Jerusalem. The Franks offered to partition conquered territory in return for the city. Refusal of the offer made it imperative that the crusade reach Jerusalem before the Fatimids made it defensible. The first attack on the city on 7th of June 1099 failed, and the siege of Jerusalem became a stalemate before the arrival of craftsmen and supplies transported by the Genoese to Jaffa tilted the balance. 2 large siege engines were constructed, and the one commanded by Godfrey breached the walls on the 15th of July. For 2 days the Crusaders massacred the inhabitants and pillaged the city. Historians now believe the accounts of the numbers killed have been exaggerated, but this narrative of massacre did much to cement the Crusaders' reputation for barbarism. Godfrey secured the Frankish position by defeating an Egyptian force at the Battle of Ascalon on 12th of August. Most of the Crusaders considered their pilgrimage complete and returned to Europe. When it came to the future governance of the city, it was Godfrey who took leadership, and the title of Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. The presence of troops from Lorraine ended the possibility that Jerusalem would be an ecclesiastical domain, and the claims of Raymond. Godfrey was left with a mere 300 knights and 2,000 infantry. Tancred also remained with the ambition to gain a princedom of his own. So, as we've learned, the First Crusade was somewhat of a success. Calls for a new crusade were almost immediate, and the Second Crusade was the first to be led by European kings. It would also be the bedrock upon which the Muslim world would unite around Saladin, who spearheaded the Muslim military effort against the Crusader states in the Levant. To follow on from that epic, we have some epic miniatures. I'll be using a generous smattering of Games Workshop Battle Pilgrims with a Grail relic, and some interesting characters from Ratnik in the form of an angry-looking priest with quill and a rather large nun with a beating stick. In my second unit, I have a variety of footsore and Old Glory miniatures from the Death and Taxes and Ringleaders and Instigators collections. The gent on a horse is an old-looking priest checking his scrolls. Perhaps he has a map to the Holy Land in amongst his papers. Who knows? He's from Game Zone Miniatures. They are all based, as is the current vogue, on 25mm squares, and the relique is on the fancy new 50 by 75mm rectangle, which I rather like, and don't recall being a thing when it was originally released, but I may be wrong on that count. I have also ordered a Peter the Hermit model from Gripping Beast, who will be able to lead the masses as a brave individual of conviction, as a key personality from the First Crusade, and the preponderance of lots of peasants. This would place the army as a very early Crusader army. Or how to use Battle Pilgrims. The Pilgrims are an essential part of my force. They provide durable troops that the peasants can flock to. Their religious fervour will sustain them when other weaker-willed fellows will fall. Plus, they are great miniatures that look the part when on campaign. Dirty of body, yet pure of spirit. Of that, I have no doubt. As a result of their long service, Battle Pilgrims have become competent fighters. In most cases, they have also become even more fervent admirers of their Grail Knight and worshippers of the Lady of the Lake, having seen what the flower of Bretonnian chivalry is truly capable of. Battle Pilgrims are the effective leaders of groups of Grail Pilgrims, as the Grail Knight never condescends to give orders to peasant rabble. Some Grail Pilgrims resent taking orders from someone no better than they, so Battle Pilgrims often have to impose order by force. Wiser Grail Pilgrims note that their chances of survival are greatly increased by doing as the Battle Pilgrims say. In the simplest sense, Battle Pilgrims lead pilgrims into battle alongside their Grail Knight, emboldening their brothers in arms. However, a Battle Pilgrim must also protect his Grail Knight from the zealous predations of his own followers. Grail Pilgrims claim anything from a discarded clout to bedstraw left after breaking camp. And true Battle Pilgrims keep such craven behaviour out of their lordship's sight, and punish those who usurp their rightful first refusal of such holy relics. Battle Pilgrims also have a host of mundane roles in their Grail Knight service, such as ordering the breaking or making of camp, acting as a knight's aide as needed, assigning followers to work as grooms for any horses in the retinue, and the like. One of the more bizarre roles, however, is the privilege to bear the company's relique, the corpse of a Grail Knight who fell in battle. Carried along in a decorated wain cart, this is a fiercely contested honour, as the relique is oft considered the ultimate symbol of their devotion and fidelity to the Lady of the Lake. In short, the Pilgrims are a super addition to this infantry-heavy Bretonnian and/or historical force. I won't be using any fantastical beasts throughout, so can feasibly use the army in its entirety for historical dust-ups too, which is an added bonus. With that in mind, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some more in the series. Au revoir, mon ami.